All right, we will get back into it. We are still going through the book of Mark. Last time we were in Mark, we were dealing with chapters 4 and 5, I believe. Went through the whole chapter of parables. I know it was a lot to go through. And then we went to chapter 5, where we seen Jesus begin to cast out the demons and cast them into the swine. Then we read about Jairus, and in between Jairus' story was the woman of the issue of blood. And then we wrapped up the story with Jairus. And there was a lot of application. There's a lot of stories to go through there. After kind of watching the video last night, or I think it was this morning or last night. Anyways, after watching it, there was a lot in there, and it got a little preachy. I'm going to hold back a little bit more and just kind of get through the teaching part, because once I was talking to a pastor, and he's like, you're preaching a little bit. I thought this was a teaching thing, and he wasn't saying it was a bad thing, but I guess once you get into that preaching thing, you just kind of go for it. And after watching the video, I was like, oh, okay, I should have just stopped there. So we're going to try to keep it strictly to just topical lessons that are here in 6. If it gets a little preachy, I will pull back or look at my brother, and hopefully he can help me out there. But hey, morning to you.
Come out, Steve.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. So again, we're in chapter 6 of Mark. We made it there. Just like the story of Jairus, the woman of the issue of blood, that story was just kind of placed in between. Mark does that often. So with this one, we're going to read through, or we're not going to read through it, but in this chapter, there's a story of John the Baptist and his death. We're not going to touch on that today. We're actually going to take that story out, and we'll try to save that for next Sunday, Lord willing. But we're going to get through his teaching, and then we're going to look at John the Baptist and his murder next Sunday, Lord willing. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. And again, we're in chapter 6. This looks a little weird, but it's supposed to say the work of a servant from Nazareth to Galilee and beyond, teaching and healing. So again, we're following Jesus. He's been on this circuit of teaching, healing. We've seen him calm the storm. We've seen him raise the dead. So the disciples are still kind of putting a picture together of who Jesus is. So are the people, the demons. No doubt about it. They know who Jesus Christ is. They know he's the Son of God. Every time he's on the scene, they scream it and yell everybody to who he is. Again, they don't believe, so they're cast out. So we'll go ahead and get into this one here. So the first one we're going to look at in chapter 6 is Jesus rejected at Nazareth in his own town. Remember, when he first was on the scene, he went to Nazareth. And this was in another gospel. He was rejected. They tried to throw him off a cliff, but he slipped through them. And then again, before he got on the scene, he was already preaching and teaching before we get into Mark. We see that in the other synoptic gospels. And we're also going to come across a scene here that is actually in every gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and that's the feeding of 5,000. So again, he goes back to Nazareth after healing of the woman and raising Jairus' daughter. He makes his way back, and I want to try to paint this in a way that where it's going to make sense, because when we looked at chapters 1 through 6, it's going to match up with verses 7 through 12. So you got to understand, the reason that he's doing this is because he's going to try to show his disciples something. So here we go. So he goes into Nazareth. Again, his disciples are with him. He's already chose his 12 disciples. They're going into Nazareth. And I just want to read a little bit of chapter 6, and then we're going to break into the notes. Then he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these teachings? And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives, and his own house." Now he could do no mighty works there, except that he had laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them, and he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit teaching. All right. So with that, Jesus returns into his hometown only to be disrespected and rejected. First, they begin to question his wisdom and works. Remember, they were kind of astonished, like, where did this guy come from? And how does he know how to do these things? He's like one of us. And why does he think he's so much more better than us and special than us? Second one, they focus on his humanity and not his authority. When they focus on his humanity, that's when they started naming off, well, isn't that the son of Mary? Aren't his brothers with us and his sisters? He's one of us. Who does this guy think he is? Not only that, but they disrespect him. Number 3, they attack him with insults. And you may not see it, but whenever you are reading along through the Bible, when you're referenced as a son of someone, you're referenced as the son of Joseph or the son of David, a male, the father. And it could be because of Jesus' background 30 plus years ago with that whole scandal about Mary being pregnant and not knowing who the father is. They didn't name him as, isn't that Jesus, the son of Joseph? Notice they didn't say that. They're kind of again, attacking him or insulting him with that word, with him not connecting him to a rightful heir of a father. And so they begin to be like, who is this guy? Why is he here? Who do you think he is? He's doing all these things. And it says their hardened hearts results in limiting Christ to be effective in lives. Jesus was marveled of their unbelief. A lot of times that we hear of unbelief or that the crowds are being marveled because of his teachings and his authority. This time it's backwards. Jesus is like kind of caught off guard because like, man, you didn't hear about what happened in Galilee, Capernaum, south side of Galilee, all these things y'all didn't hear, he's not saying y'all don't know who I am. He's just saying y'all ain't heard yet. These things are happening and these people are still rejecting him. Their hearts are hard and they're like, man, we know you. You grew up with it. You're one of us. You're Mary's kid. Joseph, Judas, and this is the first time we mention of his sisters as well. So he does have sisters. And so they're not really there yet. And I put Isaiah 53 there because it kind of alludes to this. And Isaiah 53:3 says, he is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised and we did not esteem him. And that's what's happening here. Jesus' works are his testimony. He's been traveling from the south side of Galilee to upper Galilee, Capernaum. He's traveling on the sea. People are flocking to him. Then he goes back to his hometown and he has his disciples with him. And they're like, who do you think you are? Man, we know your mama. She's still here, and your brothers or sisters. I mean, who are you to be coming to our house, our town, and telling us how things are supposed to be? This doesn't seem right. It's not added up. And Jesus is like, wow. And it wasn't that Jesus couldn't heal. He could heal. It was just that lack of faith. Remember, Jesus responds to faith. They lacked that faith, so he couldn't do a lot. When he goes to Galilee, he goes to Capernaum, people are crowding around him, and he's touching and he's healing and he's teaching. He goes to Nazareth and people are like, hey, what's up, Jesus? Hey, not even concerned. And so finally, a couple of them come up and he's able to heal some of them. So it wasn't that he didn't have the ability. It was just a lack of faith that he was not able to respond to. And one little story I want to look at is to kind of drive this home is that Jesus did have the authority. And it wasn't that even if they didn't have faith, he could still heal. We could look at Malchus whenever Peter cut his ear off. Doesn't say nowhere that Malchus had faith, anything like that, but Jesus, being who he was, picked up his ear, put it back on, and he was made whole again. So that faith thing, it wasn't because, they didn't have faith so he couldn't heal him. That didn't matter. He's Jesus. He can override that. But he's going to respond to faith. He's not going to push himself on you, but if you need a healing, hey, I'm here. Just like that person who was saying, Lord, if you're willing, you could heal me. He healed the leper. He healed all these people. So that's what's going on here. And a word study I wanted to pull out was, it says they were offended by him. The word offended is that word right there, scandalizo, where we get in the American language is scandalized. They were scandalizing Jesus. So the scandalizo means to put a stumbling block or impediment in the way upon which another may trip and fall, metaphorically. To be offended, to cause a person to begin to distrust and desert one whom they ought to trust and obey. So they were scandalizing Jesus' name, kind of trying to discredit who he was. Like, man, you're one of us. You from here. That's just like if we're here in our hometown, man, you're from Mesquite. You're from the Grove. You're from Oak Cliff. You ain't nobody special. You're going around doing these things. And Jesus is the Son of God, God in the flesh, but they were not quick to recognize it, again, because their hearts were hardened. They were looking at the humanity and not the supernatural. They were looking, again, for that Messiah that was going to be like King David and begin to conquer, and not this humble servant. So we move on. So I wanted to kind of bring that out a little bit, because his disciples are with him and they're about to send him out. So this is how I kind of want to paint this, because this is how I was being taught as I was reading it. So he's about to send his 12 out. So before he does this, he's like, I need y'all to see something. I need y'all to see how they're going to treat me, because I'm about to send y'all out here and I'm going to go to my own hometown, my own place. I'm going back to 7 Points, back to Mesquite, back to Oak Cliff, and I need y'all to see how they're going to treat me, because I'm about to send y'all out and y'all got to see how I'm doing this so y'all can do it. So here he goes. He's about to send his 12 out. They seen Jesus being rejected by his own people. He was, remember in chapter 3, he was almost rejected by his own family. Like, man, this guy's crazy. We got to go get a hold of him. It's not the Jesus we know. He's going around and causing a ruckus, and that's whenever those new relationships were defined back in chapter 3. And he was like, who are my brother, who are my sister? Only those who do the will of the Father. So again, we're back here. He's about to send the 12 out, and we'll read just a little bit of that, and that's going to be in chapter 7. And he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out 2 by 2, and he gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for their journey except for a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals, not to put on 2 tunics. He also told them, to whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from the place. And whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. So they went out and preached that the people should repent, and they should cast out many demons, and anointed with oil many who were sick, and healed them. That was the experience of the 12 after they were commissioned by Christ. So again, the disciples' first kingdom mission is to preach repentance, and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. We see that again in Mark 6 and in Matthew 6, the same story in those synoptics. So they have been walking with Jesus already for about 2 years already. They've been seeing him be rejected, casting out demons, seeing him calm storms, raise the dead. So you would kind of figure like, okay, they know who he is now, but not quite. So they get out and they send them on their mission. So the first one, they were sent out in pairs and given authority for their mission. So this was them again being commissioned out, and the instructions on how they were to do this. And they were given authority over unclean spirits, A, and B, the authority to heal sickness and diseases and raise the dead. So they were given the authority over the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And then he begins to send them out. And they were commanded by Jesus to take nothing on their journey, only a staff, 1 pair of sandals, 1 tunic, no money bag. And this, they were to rely on God's providence and his provisions the whole way, so they could learn to trust in the Father. So as they're going and they're healing the people, you can see how Jesus kind of duplicates himself, because there's one Christ, one Jesus, and then he gives the authority to his 12, and he's allowing them to manifest what he's already doing. So they're going, they're sent out, and Matthew also says that they're also able to raise the dead, as we see there in Matthew 10:8. So they have these abilities, these powers, and they're going out. And as they're going out, Jesus is kind of hanging out, and he's still in that same spot. We're not going to go into chapter 14 through 20, verses 14 through 29. Again, that's the murder of John the Baptist. That kind of is just kind of sandwiched in there, and it doesn't really help the story flow. So Lord willing, we'll look at that next Sunday real briefly. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into verse 30. Now the 12 are returning. Remember, they're out. It doesn't say how long they've been gone out, but I'm sure, just being a disciple and having that first, message, and you're preaching, and then you heal someone, and then you're casting out demons, and you're a regular person. You're not Jesus. You're just a disciple. So I'm sure they were really excited. They got stories to tell. They're coming back. There may be even people following them. So they come back and they meet and regroup with Jesus, and they return from their kingdom mission. Number one, the disciples retreat with Jesus to reflect and rest from their mission, because when they come back, Jesus is like, hey, You guys are real busy. Y'all need to kind of regroup. And so that's what they do. And there's only a couple verses. We'll read that. Then the apostle gathered to Jesus and told him all the things, both what they had done and why and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For they were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So that's when he's calling on a retreat. He calls his 12. He's like, hey, it's time to restore ourselves, retreat. Let's break away from the crowds, because I know how it is when, everybody's wanting something and you don't even have time for yourselves. So let's get together. Let's get away. Let's have our own little retreat and, get regrouped. And so the retreat was in Bethsaida. Bethsaida is actually, that means the house of fish. Learned that while I was studying this. So I thought that was interesting, because we're about to see something there. Bethsaida, a deserted place exclusive for only the 12 to have their fellowship, pray and break bread, to be strengthened and restored, private, away from the crowds. And see, that's another thing. One thing that I've learned that's important to ministry is rest, sleep. You got to restore somehow. And we see that with Jesus, when he sleeps on the boat. Even now, Jesus is teaching like, hey, y'all got to break away. Y'all are doing a lot. I get it. There's people that need help out there, but you need some me and you, some Jesus and me and you time. And so I thought that was an important thing to point out, is rest is something that we all need. We need to be restored, refreshed. And once that's done, we go back and we continue on with the mission. B, the retreat was cut short due to the people wandering like lost sheep. Jesus, like a shepherd, was moved with compassion, began to lead them out of the darkness and serve the people by teaching, preaching, and healing. And we're going to see that in this very next verse, or we don't have to read all of this, but this very next couple of verses, this is that miracle that is in all the Gospels. And he's feeding 5,000. Well, I think I put a multitude. We'll go ahead and get to that one. Because when you read into it, it's not just 5,000. It was 5,000 men plus women and children. So he's feeding a multitude of people. And this is one of the miracles that it was so awesome that he was able to do it in front of many thousands of people. So again, he's going, he sees the people, they're wandering, they're getting, they're trying to have their rest time retreat, and here comes the people, and he's like, all right, you guys go on ahead. We're going to cut this short. I'll get rid of the crowd. And so he does that, and he begins to teach the people. But while he's doing this, and he's teaching the people, and then, they're accepting him, they're sitting down, and it's getting late. Now you can see the compassion that the disciples have, or maybe they're just like, hey man, it's time to quit, Jesus. You've been teaching all day. Because one of the disciples are like, hey, it's getting late. These people are hungry. Let's send them on to the villages before it gets any darker. That way they can go and have something to eat and, get restored themselves. Well, Jesus is, and only in Mark or in John do we see that he's actually talking to Philip. And he's saying, why don't you give them something to eat? So that's a test. Remember, they have the authority to cast out demons. They can heal the people. They've seen Jesus do these things. So whenever I'm looking at it, he's probably like testing, like, why don't you do it? And I'm gonna, when Jesus is like, I'm gonna see what they're gonna do. He's just kind of just waiting back to see. But again, it's Philip that he asked, and he says, Jesus asked Philip, and then Andrew's with him, and Andrew comes with 5 loaves and 2 fish from a young boy. So Jesus is there, and he's like, why don't you do it? And Philip's like, well, we ain't got enough money. It ain't even in our church budget. We can't, feed all these people. You see how many people are here? There's 20,000 plus people here, Jesus. And Andrew's like, well, we got some fish and some bread. I mean, I don't know. This is it. And Jesus begins to prepare them. He's like, all right, tell everybody to sit down in groups and circles. And he's about to perform this miraculous thing again in all of the Gospels. Jesus examined the disciples' faith to see what they would have, what they have learned and what they would apply. Because remember, they've already been sent off. They've already been on their mission journey. And now they're back. And now Jesus is like, all right, they're hungry. What are you going to do? Feed them. Do something. They don't know. Again, their hearts are just still a little hardened. They're still putting the dots together. They're still trying to see who this Jesus is. B, the disciples failed. They failed to see that even with little, if given to the Creator, is more enough for Him to provide. And that can go across with a lot of things. That can go with the tithing. That can go with giving. That can go with any situation in your life. When you're obedient with little, God can expand to much, to His glory, and to bless you or to bless someone else. So don't always think, well, I got this much talent, or I got this much money, or I have this much gas. And God's saying, if you just act in obedient faith, I got you. And watch me work. Watch me do something with that little bit of talent, or that little bit of gas you got, or that little bit of health you got. You know, that's all he needs, that faith of a mustard seed. And then he begins to do stuff with it. Number 2, Jesus performs a miracle by demonstrating his creative power over the physical realm. And so they still weren't getting it. The teaching, preaching, healing, casting out demons, miracles, all pointed to Jesus being the Messiah. See, they were thinking, again, what is he going to do next? Man, he's feeding these people, he's healing the demons, and they're still not connecting the dots of, they just know, wow, what's he going to do next? Not, who is this guy? How is he able to do this? They're just there for the magic tricks. Most of them. I'm not saying all his disciples, but some of them. And so he's doing this all so that all these miracles, all these healings will point to who he is. And as we transition, there's a small story we're going to get into, and then we'll wrap it up here. So John's account reveals the crowd believed Jesus to be a prophet, because in the Gospel of John, again, same story, it says, those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. And that's in John 6:14. So the crowd's starting to connect the dots. Okay, he's doing this, he's doing that. This is what we've been waiting for. This has got to be the prophet. And just to reiterate, or just to kind of bring this home, Elijah the prophet also fed many with little. And that story is in 2 Kings chapter 4, 42 through 44, I believe. And we'll just go ahead and get into that. Again, being that crowd, mostly Jewish people, they would have known the story. And even being in the presence of Christ and seeing this happen, I'm sure some lights would have went off, like, whoa, didn't this happen before in the scrolls? We've read this. So 42, and again, this is Elisha. It says, then a man came from Baal-Shalisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread and newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, give it to the people that they may eat. But his servant said, what? Shall I set this before 100 men? He's only got 20 pieces of bread. He's like, feed the people. I was like, how am I supposed to do this? And he says, give it to the people that they may eat, for thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. So this is not the first incident of a miracle that we've seen. So the people, the Jewish people specifically, if they know their Torah, if they know the scrolls and the prophets, they would know that we've heard this before. We've read this before. We know this story. Elijah himself has done this before. And now Jesus, they're seeing it manifest in real time, that these baskets, it just keeps going. It keeps going, bread and fish. And the fish, I'm thinking, man, these fish have never swam before. They never even been in water, but they're multiplied, because he's only had like 2 fish. And now he's got, thousands and thousands of them, and everybody's eating, and they're being filled and full. Again, I wanted to point that out because I thought that was cool as I was going through the studies. Like, this is not the first time this has happened. Elisha's done it, and now they're connecting the dots a little bit more. We're seeing the picture of Jesus come out a little bit more clear. All right, now that we're going to go ahead and connect it to where we're at now. Verse 45. We'll read a little bit of that. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him. We'll stop right there. So in John, he fills that in a little bit more. The reason he's shooing his disciples out is because he already knows in their heart that people want to make him the king. And this is going to thwart God's plan. Again, if they make him the king, then there's no cross, there's no sacrifice, and then there's no salvation. So he knows what they're thinking. He's like, all right, you guys go ahead and on. I'm going to go ahead and deal with this crowd. And so he deals with the crowd, the multitude, again, because they're going to take him by force, and he begins to shoo them away. So now we'll get back into it. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat, go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. While he sent the multitude away, and when he sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. And Jesus is always doing that. He's always making time to pray, having that fellowship with the Father, something we need to take note on that. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone in the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Fourth night is going to, the fourth watch is going to be anywhere from 3 to 6 a.m. So it's late at night. They've been rolling all day or all night. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled, but immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Don't be afraid." Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. All right. So immediately after feeding the multitude, Jesus perceived that the crowd intended to make him king by force, and that's when he just goes on and sends the disciples ahead. I'll deal with the crowd, get rid of them. That way the Father's will is going to continue to be done. Then the crowd experiencing the miracle began to connect the dots to Jesus. So again, that was that quote that this man is a prophet, and that's coming from Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 through 18, and that's going to be him, that he's going to raise a prophet among them. So they were connecting the dots. The crowd was. This prompts Jesus to depart from the area and separate from his disciples to get away from the crowd, pray, and regroup. The disciples face another storm in the middle of the sea. Because remember, we were, the last storm there was, Jesus was actually with them in the boat sleeping. Jesus watched the disciples rowing against the storm and came to them on the very issue that was causing distress. We're going to stop there. So, remember, Jesus is in the mountain praying. He's up. He's got an aerial view. He's looking at the sea. He sees the disciples out there, and they are rowing against the wind. Remember, this is that bowl, and 700 feet between sea level, so the mountains are high. So it's like a bowl of water here. The north winds are coming in, and it's doing its thing just like before, almost like a hurricane. Jesus is up there praying. He's watching. So I'm going to go down there and see what they're doing. He goes down. He begins to walk on the water. And what I thought was interesting is when they were in the boat the first time with the storm, they weren't calling on Jesus or looking for Jesus. They were kind of startled. Jesus woke up, calmed the storm. Even now, when the storm is here and they're rowing against it and Jesus is watching them, they're still not calling on Jesus. And then when they see a figure far away, they freak out and they're screaming and they're thinking this is a ghost. In Greek, it's a phantasma, which is a phantom. They think it's just some ghost. They've been casting out demons. They know demons are real. They know about the spiritual realm. And so they're getting scared, they're rowing, and it says that Jesus would have passed them by, but in the Greek, it's more of Jesus was going to come alongside of them. So Jesus sees them in the middle of the sea, and they're rowing, straining. Remember, it's the third or fourth watch, so it's almost 3 to 6 in the morning. So they must have been rowing for hours, tired. You first group, you get it, muscle tired, the second group get it. So they're just trying, rowing against the wind, rowing against the waves. Jesus is just strolling right along, comes up, and they're freaking out. They stop rowing, and hey, it's a phantom, it's a ghost. And he's like, no, peace, be still, speak, good cheer. And Matthew tells a different story. We're not going to get a whole lot of that into that. Matthew tells the story of that's when Peter walks on the water. Lord, if it's you, command me to come out of the boat. And he steps out on the boat, and then we know the story. He begins to sink. Jesus pulls him up. But one thing I want to look at here is when, and this is that try not to get too preachy part, when we're going through that storm or that chaos that we're going through, we sometimes put Jesus on the back burner. We don't even call for him first. See, that's what they should have did. Jesus, where you at? Oh, we need Jesus. We've known this situation before. It's happened before. Let's call Jesus this time. They don't even do that. And not only that, they're not even looking for Jesus in their situation. And when they finally notice him, he's walking on the very problem that they're fighting against. See, a lot of times it's like that for us. We have a situation, we have a circumstance in our life, and we're crying out for help everywhere except for Jesus. And then when we do, we don't recognize him because he's coming on that same situation, that same circumstance, and all we got to do is acknowledge him in that situation and let him work. The disciples did not do that. So I'm going to try to move on there because there's a lot more we could unpack, but we'll keep going. I'll read that A again. Jesus watched his disciples rowing against the storm and came to them on the very issue that was causing distress. Jesus reveals once again to his disciples he is the sovereign Lord of all creation. Because remember, it says that they still didn't understand about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. They didn't understand who Jesus was. They were just, again, astonished at these miracles. This man with the great wisdom, and now things are kind of lining up, and they didn't realize that this was God in the flesh, God Almighty. He's created the world, and they were seeing him manifest almost everything out of nothing with the fish and the loaves. And it still was just like, it wasn't clicking for him. And this little scene is very important because later on it's going to come into play. Only in the book of John, though. And let's see. And this, we're about to close this out here. I'll read the last couple of verses and we'll close it out, and I'll go back to that John. Here, Jesus heals at Gennesaret. Jesus' popularity grows and he heals at Gennesaret. In verse 53, when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick, wherever they heard he was, wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or country. They laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. That sounds familiar there. And as many as touched him were made well. So now we can really see that this fame is starting to spread. Remember when he healed the leper that was unclean? People thought that was impossible. Then he was smooth as a baby. The lady with the issue of blood must have heard that. Oh, if he can heal this person, a leper, I can be healed. And remember, her thing was, I could just touch that garment, that hem of the garment, I can be made whole. Now that comes right back. So her testimony must have got around, because now people are like, we don't even need to go up to him. We don't even need to talk to him. If we could just touch the hem of his garment, we could be made whole, because their faith is growing. Now the fields are beginning to ripen, and now the fame is spreading. The truth is being spread throughout all of Galilee and Capernaum and everywhere he's going. And now these stories are getting around. And now they're like, well, we just need to touch the hem of his garment. That's what the lady with the issue of blood did. I'm sure if we could do it, we could be made whole. And so that's exactly what happened. So what they would do is whenever he would go into, I don't know if I have another. Yeah. When he would go into the walls of Jerusalem, they would know, well, if he's going to be working or walking through here, they would go to the crowded places, the marketplaces, anywhere they thought that Jesus would be walking through, that's where they would lay their people. And you can imagine the people carrying beds of sick people, maybe holding their children, 2-4 people carrying beds. I mean, they're just flocking in hopes to see Jesus, not only to touch or hear him, but if they can just touch the garment. I mean, this is where this thing is going now. The fame is spread. The mission is working. The kingdom is being furthered more and more and more. And now people are flocking to the Christ. The next part are going to be reflections, but after the storm was calmed by Jesus and he steps in the boat, in John, it says he goes on to teach about the bread of life. And this is where, we don't see this in these Gospels, but this is where things get really shaky. He tries to tell them that I'm the bread of life. You know, they were seeking him. He says, surely you seek me because you were fed. They only wanted some food. They wanted to see some magic tricks. They weren't seeking him because of who he was. And so that's when he breaks into that teaching. I'm the bread of life. You know, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, and they're like, hold up, man. We don't even know what you're talking about. We're not into cannibalism. We're Jews. We don't do cannibalism. And so that teaching was so hard for them that in chapter 6 of John, verse 66, that many of the disciples walked away from him. And I think that's why that boat scene was so important, because that very next verse, he turns to the disciples and he's like, and what about you? Are you going to leave me too? And he's like, Peter's like, no. Who else are we going to follow? You have the words of life. And that's why I think that boat scene is so important, because it was only his 12 disciples. They were already having an issue trying to figure out who he was, because they didn't understand the miracle of the feeding. Because remember, it says their hearts were still hardened. But now that they've seen him do that, and they've seen him do it before when they've calmed the storm. But now, again, we'll go back to Peter's little scene. Peter, if this is Jesus, I got to check this out. If you're Jesus, command me and I'll go out there. Come on, Peter. And Peter has to put that first foot, and I'm sure he's scared, the water, and solid. The other foot, solid. And he begins to walk. And then he takes his focus off of Jesus. He sees a storm, the wind, the waves, and he begins to sink. Again, we'll close it out with that because it gets a little preachy, but that's how we get sometimes. We can get so involved in our circumstances, and we're praying, I pray, Jesus, help me with this situation, my health, my finances, whatever it may be. And then we lose focus, and then we begin to sink. And it was only until Peter cried out, that's when Jesus was able to pull him up out of the water. See, we can get so caught up in our circumstances, we don't even think about Jesus who was in front of us. That's walking on our very problem that we're dealing with. And, I'm trying this, and my partner told me to try this here, and the self-help book said I got to do these steps here, and Dr. Phil says you got to do it this way, every way except for Jesus. See, once we do that, because when we do look those other ways, Dr. Phil, help books, we're sinking. We don't even know it sometimes. We're sinking, and by the time we look up, the water's above our head, and we're reaching out trying to say Jesus' name, and then by His grace, He'll pull you right back up, set you on, get in the boat. And He said as soon as they get in the boat, everything was peaceful. And that's where we got to be at, in the midst of our circumstances, the storms, the trials, to stay focused on the Christ. I know it gets hard sometimes, especially when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, or even getting ready for a birth of a new child, the loss of a job, car's not working right. Any situation that can try to hinder your growth or make you focus over here, dangling that over here, and Jesus is over here. See, that's where we got to turn and stay firm in our focus on Christ. We'll do a reflection and we will close this out. There's no application today just because we're just lessons. But the reflection I want to go back to is maybe think about the disciples and their kingdom mission is, are you fulfilling the kingdom mission? Because we all have a mission. Our mission is to expand the gospel with our time, talents, and treasures that we all have. They're all not the same, but we all have something we can do to further the kingdom. And we don't need to be out there. I'm not saying you can be, but I'm not saying you got to go out there on the streets and preach and, have you heard about Jesus? Do it in your own way that the Holy Spirit leads you to expand the kingdom. The second one, just like when Jesus, and this was in John, this is kind of what prompted me, when they were looking for Jesus, and He's like, surely you're not looking for me because of this, but because you were fed, that's why you're looking for me. So what is it you're seeking? What is it every day that when you get up, this is motivating your actions? What are you seeking? Is it Christ or is it something else? Again, you just answer this inwardly. And the last one I kind of came up with was, are you seeking Christ in the midst of your trial? And that's that same situation with the storm. And Jesus walking on that very storm, the very thing that was causing them distress, Jesus came walking on. The answer was already there. And instead of looking and holding on to the Christ, we know that Peter began to sink. So the question is, are you seeking Christ in the midst of your trial? If there's something you're going through right now, are you seeking Christ in it? And I'm not just saying like picture Christ. I mean, seeking, when I say seek Christ, I'm talking about getting into this. Christ is the living word. We got to get into the written word and look for the issue you're dealing with. And I've said this a couple times. Every time I have an issue I'm dealing with, I'll get in the word. I'll look for someone who's going through something similar to me, and I'll try to apply it right there. If I need wisdom, I'll go into Exodus. And I remember when God was getting the people out, they didn't know how to build things and do certain things. So He's like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna bless you with this wisdom so now you know how to work with your hands and tools. And, and even with Elijah or the prophets, Samuel, as soon as they turned, they were given a new heart and that wisdom. So God can do these things, but you got to seek Him out. And that's how you do it. It doesn't have to be always in the New Testament, but that's a good place to start. But this thing is filled with lessons that you can go through, that if you're going through something, like, man, that's really similar to what I'm going through and what I'm feeling. How can I apply that? Let the Holy Spirit guide you in that. So that's what that is, seeking Christ in the midst of your trial. Getting in that word, looking for your prescription, and then taking it. And then we'll open it up for questions and comments. I know that was a brief. Again, we took out the John the Baptist story, so that shortened it up a bit. But I think John, I just want to give John the time that he deserves. You only see John in here a couple times, and we give him a lot of time in the front talking about the way he dressed and his background. So we'll do that next week, Lord willing. But any questions, comments?